Ladies and gentlemen, a very warm welcome to this Business Day Dialogue, which of course is being held in association with LFP Training. My name is Samay Zake, and I will be your host for this morning's event. To get us started, I'd like to call up Lucanio Nyanda, who is the editor of Business Day.
As Samay said, so my name is Lucanio Nyanda. I'm the editor of Business Day, which I'm sorry, I meant to bring some copies for you today, but we sort of forgot to do that. But anyway, I'm not going to make any big speeches because I don't think you need me to tell me about how important the subjects that you're going to be covering are. Otherwise, you wouldn't be here so early in the morning, even though I understand the breakfast is very good, that it might have been worth it on its own, but I'm sure that's not why you're here. And just without much further ado, I just wanted to thank our partners, LFP Training. I think this is quite an amazing event, and the subject that's been covered here is so crucial, not only just to how our businesses are sustainable. In the end, it's going to determine how sustainable our society is and how sustainable our democracy is. So I hope you have fruitful discussions, and I hope you have a good day, and thank you for coming again, and it's really our pleasure, and thanks again to LFP for helping us get this together. Thank you very much.
I always say I don't mind public speaking, but those stairs are the worst thing coming up here and going down to. Just a very warm welcome from all of us at LFP. My name is Werner Loubscher. I'm Managing Director for the company. And people often ask us, what does LFP stand for? And we always joke and say, there's all the billboards and TVs and ads that you see at the airport, but it really is a joke, but we know it's everywhere. But it really stands for leadership, focus, and passion. And I can honestly stand here being so proud of the brand and say that we are the leaders in our industry when we talk about development and upskilling of people through learnerships, and then also assisting our clients and corporates with transformation. I think a large part of what makes us proud of what we're doing is the fact that there's a portion of our community, especially those living with disabilities, that we can literally see that we are transforming lives and assisting people that are desperately in need of some form of assistance. And I think LFP has probably been summed up very, very nicely by our CEO recently when he said that we have the passion to make a difference and help transform companies and lives one learner at a time. So from our side, that is our motto and that is our passion. And again, I'd like to thank you for being here this morning, and I'm sure you're going to find it most informative. Thank you.
Thanks to both Lucanio and Werner. So ladies and gentlemen, training and development has for many years been a key element in addressing critical personnel development initiatives. The focus has steadily shifted towards fast-tracking skills development, which, as we are all well aware, are being integrated into the overall business plans of the organizations presented here today. The current economic environment, however, means that often budgets aimed at doing just this are often first in line to be cut. Nevertheless, strategies need to be continually initiated to harness knowledgeable workers as competitive resources for the new global economy and for world competitiveness. Our deliberations here today are aimed at discussing openly and rationally about the emerging challenges of the skills development strategy in South Africa, and at the same time highlight the importance of investing in our workforce. To help us set the scene for these discussions, I'd like to invite our first guest, who will be delivering this morning's keynote address. As former head of Sage One International, he oversaw the growth and development of Sage's cloud-based accounting and payroll solutions in Africa, Australia, Middle East, and Asia. Prior to that, he dedicated his 25-year career to Sage Pastel, the innovative business software company he co-founded in 1989. During this time, he held several management positions in the company, including financial director, chief operating officer, managing director, and head of Sage One AAMEA. He has played a central role in the company's growth from a startup to a part of the JSE-listed Softline Group, right up to its present incarnation as part of the Sage PLC Group, a FTSE 100 company. Ladies and gentlemen, Stephen Cohen.
Thank you for the intro. I left Sage about a year and 6 months ago, and it's probably been the most difficult time of my life, because in these 18 months, Oh, that looks good. Okay. In these 18 months, I've really struggled with who am I, what I achieved, was I just lucky? And I'm now, what has really happened to me in the last year and a half is I've become a lot wiser. And I started wearing glasses. Okay. So that comment up here, the teacher appears when the student is ready. First of all, I didn't make that up. Let's just make that clear. We can say so many obvious things on the stage about training, education, and yet you've got to go 360 degrees again and again and again for it to kind of settle into your stomach about what does it really mean. And I would say in the 30 years that I was in business, is to get the student to be ready to actually want to learn, to take in the information, to understand why they're there in the first place. And what really hassles me, because by the way, this is the most important speech of the year that I'm making. I think half of South Africa at least actually isn't ready to learn. Because when I think about the dynamics and the issues facing South Africa at the moment, we are at such a critical juncture, and there's so much anger and so much blaming that it actually doesn't allow us to hear in the first place. And if you can't hear, then how the hell can you actually learn? And I've had many chats while I spend all my time in Melrose Arch, specifically at the comedy club up the road. I've become like a mannequin that just stands there and talks to people. But it's amazing what happens. So there was a talk here the other day, arranged by a friend of mine. And apparently there was a very good speaker, and he didn't tell me about it. And I said to him, when I bumped into him at the coffee shop, I said, how could you not have invited me? He said, but Stephen, you've run a business for 30 years. You've got nothing to learn from this dude. I said, honestly, and I do not patronize when I talk like this, I learn from Gary, who fills up my motorbike every week at the Total in Ilova. They'll just say such wise little things. Now, you can't hear that stuff if you're in an angry mood or you kind of like are doing the blame game. We can all learn so much if we are in the place to listen. And what hassles me about corporates, because that's kind of where I left, is everybody, what are you doing tomorrow? Oh, I'm going on a training course or cursus, whatever the Afrikaans dudes call it. Well, how do you pronounce it? Cursus. It's like I was back in the army. It's like, dudes, do you know why you're going on this course? Are you interested in going on the course? And I'll tell you a fascinating thing. I think I'm a reasonably intelligent dude. Very naive. I am extremely naive. You need to know that. I dig loving conversations, and I want to believe people. And very often it's led to my downfall, but happily it's worked out more times than not. What I tell you, I think I'm bright. In Standard 9, in our day, I'm looking at you because you're over 50, aren't you? I got 30% for maths. 30%. Now, you've got to understand, in the Jewish world, that doesn't look too good, you know? Your parents want you to be a doctor or a dentist or a lawyer, and I'm getting 30% for maths. And then I was so fortunate to get a good teacher the next year. I promise you I got a distinction in matric. Now, how do you go from 30% in Standard 9, grade 11, to a distinction? It was the teacher, funny enough, but somehow he made me ready and excited. And I'll never forget with geometry. We used to live on a small holding in Honeydew. And I remember sitting at the kitchen table, and I was struggling with geometry. And there was this theorem that I couldn't sort out. I took 2 hours just smashing my head against the top, and I got it. And I was lousy at geometry. It then became my best subject. So how can that happen? Is it that I used to be a delinquent. I'm still half a delinquent. But if you get me interested, I'm just going to be like blotting paper. I'm just going to suck it all in. And I don't want teachers to think I'm a teacher. I mean, first, it's ridiculous. Teachers should be the most highly paid people in the world, and I'm sorry I've caused hassles for your budget now, okay? But I mean, I'm leaving my kids with these people who are spending 6 hours a day with them. It's insane that the bankers who almost corrupted and screwed up our whole world in 2008, they're the dudes earning the good bucks. And the teachers who form such an important role in society aren't that well paid. And my problem today is I think half the teachers in this country are just there because they want to earn a salary. It's a big problem. And when I read what they're doing in Scandinavia in particular, and you should all watch that video, I can't even remember what it was. It's unbelievable what they do there. And yet they've got, like, they get the highest marks. Singapore's another thing I read about in The Economist yesterday. Their teaching techniques. So I just hope, and I don't know how many of you are teachers. Well, actually, every one of you are teachers when I think about it. How many of you have kids? Like, be proud and not embarrassed. Well, you all teachers. How many of you have friends? I assume all of you. You are all teachers, whether or not you know it. And in my depressing life that I've had, I actually, I don't want to say I'm Descartes, I think therefore I am. I'm not that bright. But I will tell you there's only one reason you are on this planet, and that is to make a difference to others. It can be the only logical reason. I was recently in Greece, and I'm reading, there's a beautiful series of books, a short history of the world, a short history of literature, science, and I picked up the one about religion. Now, I'm kind of half an atheist. I can't decide how guilty I am to admit it, okay? Because I'm going to go to hell, obviously. And I was thinking, I'm reading all these books. I'm doing it. I'm filling my head with knowledge on these beautiful pebble beaches in Paxos. And I thought, if I died today, well, what was it all for? It's in my head. I'm entertaining myself. There can actually be no reason I'm reading this book unless I can share it with others. I mean, and when I say these things, I'm not just saying it. I've thought about it 1,000,000 times on my motorbike driving through Mozambique or wherever it is. It can be the only reason you're here. The gift that you live your kids. If you had to get knocked over by a bus today, would you be upset about it? Well, you won't be because you'll be dead. So who's going to have the issue? Your friends, your kids, your husband, all the people that you leave behind. And I think that we really need to let that sink in. So they asked me also to talk about a bit about BEE. Now, it's a hotly contested, debated topic because it's been done wrong. What do they call it? I don't know, there's so many names. It's the most important thing in the country at the moment. Absolutely the most important thing in the country. And my issue is that I've written a whole lot of stuff that I hope I remember. The people growing up today are like trees. So you're either going to see them, they look pretty, you shine the leaves, but their roots aren't cool. And the tree ends up falling over. So I think what is very often happening is that when kids grow up and go into business, working for all you guys, or maybe you guys are part of those kids. You not. Okay? You need to know that the education system in most instances has been substandard. You have to understand that. So how are you going to get the roots to be firmer in the soil? So it's almost like upside down in this country. We've got to do more education by the time people leave school. Because you have the opportunity to really strengthen people's roots. And in my time at Pastel, I used to give a lecture once a month to the staff. And whoever wanted to come could come. Now, Pastel is it's accounting software. And you know what I used to lecture on? What I'd read in the New Yorker, what I'd read in The Economist, what I'd read in the Business Day. I wasn't interested in work, actually. I wanted to change people's perception of how the world works. And I remember one of my famous topics, I lectured on nuclear energy, which I know nothing about, but it's amazing. Eh? Dudes who come out of matric. What is nuclear energy? Oh, well, it's the atom gives energy. No, I said all it's there is to heat water to turn a turbine that actually then uses electromagnetic stuff that we all learned in matric. And that's how it works. And it amazed me that dudes didn't know it. I'll tell you what amazed me more. I didn't know it until a year before. I just assume the atom explodes, you know, and stuff happens. It's got nothing to do with that. Well, I mean, it does in a way, but it's to heat the water and cause steam. And I just thought there's so much simple stuff. But your responsibility here is absolutely critical, and you can have a gas doing it. That's what amazes me. I mean, imagine standing up in front of students and seeing their eyes come alight. I mean, there can be no better self-fulfillment than that. And that's why I used to do lecturing for money, and I think I was good at it because I have a difficulty understanding. So I can relate to people. I know what their struggles are because I went through the same stuff. Once I grasp the concept, then I'm quite good at expanding it from there. But you guys are in the coolest position to make a difference to others. And I think when I think about BEE, the problem that I have with it is that most of the people who are actually implementing it do not understand actually why. I think I've got 5 more minutes. So let me just end with an interesting point. Why do most of businessmen, who we know can be problematic because money is their driving force, why do they do BE? Because they want to get the tender. They want to be able to do government work. It's got nothing to do with that. The students aren't ready. Why did you change my slide, okay? The students aren't ready. If you think that that's what BE is about, you are not ready to actually learn and understand why. I'll tell you what BE is about. It's about me having a cool country to live in 50 years' time. It's about your children having a cool country to live in 50 years' time. And unfortunately, it's been so distorted in the way that it's been practiced that there is such now a bad connotation about it. And particularly business, I believe, are the only entities that are going to get it right. Because the teachers at the moment at school level aren't cool. And listen, whenever I talk, I generalize. I mean, maybe you're a genius teacher and you're getting offended by what I say. But I've got to generalize. So business has just a massive role to play. And let's not be greedy. It's not about the tender. It's about getting this country to be better. And I think that if that sinks in, your demeanor and the way, your foundation in which you teach will change. And something that I wrote here that is so critical is if I look at the last 30 years of my business career, one of my hardest things was hiring the good people. So if you want to do good business, your biggest challenge is not training or educating. It's actually finding the right people. And I think there should be a university course, actually. I would do it for business people. A year spent on how do you spot talent. Because you need to know when is the plant actually sick and when is it worth nurturing. And because I'm naive, I made so many mistakes. A dude would walk in, he looked cool, hey, you my man. Hey, he's got to write the psychometric test. I'm not interested, he's a cool dude. And 6 months later, it's a disaster. But luckily, the fact that I'm standing up here, I must have made more good decisions than bad decisions. But I was thinking that if I can track the success of our business, I can pinpoint the people who came in and changed my business. Now, if it is so important, then obviously I asked myself the question, were they good already, or did I make them better? I think there was a seed that they had good ethics and good morals, and that's why one of the questions I ask them most these days is when somebody says, that person's brilliant, I said, tell me about their parents. Because I said, he's got an MBA and this and that. I said, but those are the leaves on the tree, but I want to know about the roots. What were their parents like? How come they actually are good people? And the hardest thing in business now is, when do you make that call about this is a person worth training? So don't get lost in the BE numbers, the scorecards. I mean, I know they're important. It's an outcome story. Start long before that and think about how you're going to nurture and grow your organization. Look, I think those are very important points. It's a hard thing in business to hire good people. I swear, when I look back, it was the changing force to my business. And remember, technology, programmers. And that's why I said the MBAs and all that stuff are not important to me. are always hired for ethics and a person's willingness to learn. Unfortunately, you know what often my best employers were? Insecure overachievers. They're insecure, they always want to please. It's like, you know, when you've got that child, they're the best child. Mom, what can I do? Can I help you? But often they end up being screw-ups in their later life because they're so insecure. So, you know, you've got to take that risk as well. You want to make them feel secure. In fact, it's a tragedy that my best employees were insecure overachievers because it's not healthy. I can take advantage of that. I can manipulate it. But it's a big issue. I would rather them tell me, Stephen, I'm healthy, I'm confident. You think I did a bad job? I didn't. It's your insecurity that makes you think I'm doing a bad job. And that's the stuff that you oaks have to deal with. You are so important. This speech is the most important speech in South Africa at the moment because I want to know whether the 40 million people in this country, or whatever the hell it is, whether they are ready to learn what actually growing a cool country is about. Thank you very much.
When you quoted that stat of half of South Africa not ready to learn is rather worrying. But I think with the right teachers, as you've said, we can all get distinctions. Generalizing. All right. So ladies and gentlemen, ensuring that a country's workforce acquires the required and relevant mix and level of knowledge and skills is something that we need to obviously address. It's going to necessitate continued and steadfast commitment to the concept of training and development. To help us unpack that, I want to call up our next panel of guests who are going to help us discuss the issues and some of the challenges within skills development. I'd first like to call up Dominic Kalbape. He is from Cohesion Collective. Dominic, if you could make your way up to the stage, please. Dominic is a renowned author as well as a dynamic speaker in the fields of personal empowerment, leadership, and people dynamics, where he shares practical, proven strategies in unlocking personal and team potential to achieve tangible results. He has experience within the HR field, having worked for major corporate companies such as Unilever and South African breweries. Next up is Thabo Mashaba. He is Group Chief Empowerment and Transformation Officer at Alexander Forbes. If you could make your way to the stage. He joined Alexander Forbes in 2012 as Group Chief Human Resources Officer. He was responsible for conceptualizing and executing the Group Human Resources Strategy and is currently, as I mentioned, Group Chief Empowerment and Transformation Officer. Also joining us is Catherine Weinberg, Director and Founder of Fatola. She's a seasoned entrepreneur and has years of experience across a range of sectors. She has dedicated the past 10 years to helping small and growing businesses succeed using a holistic, people-first philosophy. Many of her innovative methodologies have, by the way, been adopted as benchmark best practice in South Africa. And last but not least, Nora Munyai, Head of Training and Development at Imperial Logistics. Nora joined Imperial in November 2016, and her portfolio includes facilitating learning and development strategy in the group, as well as empowering all employees to optimize their own career and learning aspirations. So I want to start off by looking at the amendment to the Skills Development Act, which has had far-reaching consequences, obviously, for the training institutions, employees, as well as the companies that employ them. If you factor in the broad-based Black Economic Point requirements, then one could possibly argue that training becomes a compliance and a numbers game instead of a mechanism used to address the skills gap that we need to drive competitiveness. Your response, let's start with you.
Unfortunately, in some spheres of our work, it has become that, to Stephen's point earlier on, that some of the corporations are looking at skills development to endpoints for BEE, to get business, obviously. What it is and what the objective of BEE is, specifically, I mean the financial services sector, what it is that it can do for our business, specifically linking into employment equity. We came from a background where we have less skilled people than the industry or organizations need, and skills development was there to facilitate the acquiring of those skills so that we can have people that are educated, are skilled for us to absorb in their organizations. And that's where skills development comes in. So we seem to have lost that objective.
If we look at it, we look at the scorecard at the moment, that is what most organizations are chasing, the percentage that is there. the spend that is there so that we can be able to acquire more opportunities. However, I think if we can step back and actually look at how do we make it purposeful, how do we make that skills development purposeful, what are the problems, what are the challenges, what are the pains that the organization is experiencing, what are the goals that we want to achieve, and then align those categories, those strategies to what the organization intends to achieve, and also address career aspirations, then there will definitely be a different shift.
Yeah. Absolutely. Fantastic. So for me, I'd like to take a step back. If any organization right now in South Africa looks at skills development, and for them they're looking at it as a compliance issue, then we may as well stop this discussion now, because we're going to be having this discussion 20 years from now, 40 years from now. We are in a country that is faced with unemployment, inequality, and deep poverty. Skills development is the one area where organizations, where employers can be able to play in that part in order to help South Africa in beginning to alleviate some of these things. And by the way, if an organization is doing skills development and they're saying that there's a trade-off between them investing in skills and then the business benefits that they derive insofar as efficiency, productivity, and profitability, then they're not doing skills. Because part of your skills development should 100% speak to and benefit your business imperative.
Catherine?
I think it's such an important point that everyone's made. The danger is when, I think I've lost my mic.
Yeah.
The danger is when the legislation sets such a high bar that attention is focused just on that. The reality is, if one's going to create a healthy future, there needs to be a balance between three components. One is the person. Do I see you? Do I understand you? Am I meeting your growth needs? The second is the business. Am I enabling the business to grow? Because if the business isn't growing and surviving, there is no employment. And the last thing should be the legislation. The danger is when you make the legislation so onerous, everything focuses on that. The anxiety becomes all on the tick box.
And that is a rather big burden, the legislation, I mean.
I think it's a huge burden, and I think I'm not from the corporate sector, but my understanding from conversations with my colleagues here, it is a huge challenge, yes.
Nora, would you like to add to that?
Is it on?
Go for it.
Okay, so it is definitely a big challenge at the moment. You can look at different organizations who are struggling financially, economically at the moment. So how do we make sure that rand, we can stretch it in a way that we are able to address skills development within the organization? We also address our business imperatives. Most organizations are restructuring at the moment. Yeah. But I think if we step back, can you hear me? Okay. So I think if we step back and look at what development is really about, it's as critical as a staff member receiving that salary at the end of the month. So it talks to productivity, it talks to performance, it talks to the business growing. So how do we make sure that we use legislation as an opportunity to be able to help us grow our organizations and also grow South Africa? Yeah. And in the process, step back and also look at the communities within the organizations, because although we're growing our businesses, we also need to be able to look at those communities within the organization to be able to also assist. So what we do at Imperial Logistics, we actually have some of the initiatives we run. We look at children of our staff and bring in initiatives that can be able to develop them, like the bursaries. For our staff, we also look at what are the challenges that we are experiencing and how do we bring in, from a BE perspective, what strategies can we be able to employ? So it could be a learnership, it could be a tertiary education. And in that, we're able to run a parallel process between legislation and growing our business. And at the end of the day, we can be able to see that bicycle starting to move.
So I'd like to follow on by asking, so year in, year out, as organizations, we're spending quite a considerable sum on these training and development programs. What's holding us back as corporate SA if we are spending these sums of money on training and development? Are we actually seeing a tangible effect on the organizations that are doing these development programs?
Absolutely. So the way in which I see it, the level of investment going in that is not matched then by the benefits that comes in relative to the investment, to me speaks to people spending on compliance rather than real needs and skills that need to be developed. The skills development component of this discussion falls in the broader one as we kicked off with the BEE. I have not met a single executive or CEO within South Africa that says they're not for the transformation journey of this country. But for some reason or another, most of the organizations struggle. There's a disconnect between our intention versus what we actually are able to achieve. So I come from a school of thought that says, judge a tree by the fruit that it bears. And when I look at the fruits that I look around within corporate South Africa, yes, we talk the talk, yes, we're politically correct, but we actually don't believe in doing the investment. Hence, why you'll see huge amounts of money supposedly that's going towards skills development, but not necessarily translating in these skills that are contributing towards the growth.
I would take us back to the objective of the legislation, the B Act and Financial Sector Charter or any other charter in different industries to say, what is it there for? It was there to facilitate skills. We're dealing with unintended consequences of that because of the how part, to the point of the fruits of the trees. Because we all rush into it and wanting to comply and wanting to end points, forgetting to do a diagnostic as to what the organization needs, how far do we go in terms of growing the skills of the organization to be ready for the future, and how do we do that? That's where the mismatch happens, because we rush into it, and at the end, we spend so much money, the little that we have, given all these circumstances we have in industry, but we don't have the fruits that we thought we were plowing.
Catherine, let me get your thoughts from an entrepreneur's perspective.
I think there's two gaps. I think the first gap is that the kids that are coming out of tertiary education are in no way matched to the work needs. There's a huge gap with, and I'd see the difference between international graduates that come out as interns and our local South African interns. So there's already a gap between your education level and what's needed in the business. And then the second gap is the growth gap between somebody coming in as a junior or as an intern and what you actually need to be efficient and effective in a business. And in a small business, people are even more important than in a large business, because small business is all about the people. Our investment in people is far higher than it is in capital. And if you just have a team of 10 people and your one good person leaves, your business suffers. Or the same thing, if you have 10 people and one person is causing trouble, it's a huge issue. So the need to have really effective growth of people in small businesses is much greater, and there's generally less money to throw. You can't just throw money at the problem. And so the requirement to be really efficient and effective, and as I said, to really see you and to understand, I want to grow you, what is it that you want to do and matching that need, it's even greater. It's important at a corporate level, but the burden and the expectation is much higher the smaller the business.
Yeah. So the target for skills development has increased dramatically. And is there any sense of how corporate South Africa is doing in achieving some of these targets?
So in terms of achieving, I think what we currently do as an organization is to make sure that although we cannot drive the 6%, we can afford to drive the 6%, we can be able to look at internal targets that will be able to help us transform. So how do we make it fit for purpose? How do we make it transformational? And in that, it helps us to be able to drive our initiatives. So we look at the scorecard as a whole, and then we also zoom in. So I'm responsible for skills development, for example. Then we zoom in and say what types of strategic initiatives we can be able to drive. to be able to ensure that we can be able to stretch that one buck that we've got, given the economic challenges that we're facing. And we find that through that process it helps. So some of the initiatives that we drive, we look at disability. It's one of the areas that requires attention. At this point in time, we have been able to provide development to about 237 learners. We also run initiatives for our employed staff, but again, it has to be fit for purpose. It can't be just about driving the target. It must also be about driving the business objectives.
Yeah. Thabo, would you like to add to that?
I think we're making a mistake sometimes in the way we drive it, in the sense that we're looking at giving skills to people who have already got some kind of skills or some kind of education. Mm-hmm. So the way we run it, and maybe many other organizations do the same thing, is that we run learnerships, internships, we send people to executive development programs and so forth. And little is done to coach a person to acquire a skill. We're still on education as opposed to be in a skill set kind of a mission to acquire. Because if you run a learnership, you take interns, for instance. Those guys are graduates, maybe recently graduate or graduated a while ago. What do? You craft a learnership for them, you put them back into school. Instead of saying, what is it that you can learn in a job that you can sell yourself for the future? And you don't hone into those.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. I think that this thing of trying to, that gap that I said between your junior and a senior, that's about skills transfer. That's about mentorship.
Yes.
And that in the new regulations is virtually ignored. Yes. And yet that's actually where growth happens. Yeah. Because you all know that you can learn something in university, yep, and you come to the workplace and just, sorry, buddy, that's pointless. Put it to one side. Yeah. Now you need to really learn the game. Yeah. And yet the legislation as it sits only points to formal skills training, learnerships and internships, which frankly for most people are just a waste. It's a waste of the 2 years. The learning that takes place in those things is very minimal.
Just to add on that, in the tools that we have and the promotion we have for BE, for financial codes, I would place more emphasis in incentivizing that part, the coaching and mentorship part, definitely, not the learning, acquiring a particular qualification.
Absolutely.
Specifically in senior management. Senior management, all of us are learned. Yeah. You've been to Harvard, you've done your MBA. What more do you need to learn?
Yeah. So I also think it's about striking the balance. I mean, if we look at the corporate environment, about 60% of our staff population in my environment is general workers. So yes, I agree, but I also disagree. Because how do we make sure the future is now? There's so much change that is happening. We get into the fourth industrial revolution in terms of digitization. Are we really capacitating, even on a qualification and technical level, where yes, mentoring and coaching is required, but are we providing that capability so that we are also future ready? Or would we be retrenching them because actually they are not ready, and then now we need to hire a workforce that is future ready? So I think it's about striking the balance.
Okay. Dominic's dying to say something.
So I'd say even when we're doing the training, we need to begin to step back and look at our focus. Because this is the trap that we're going to run into. If we're just focusing on the lower level operational skills and never bother actually developing our technicians, developing our artisans, to eventually become the production manager, to eventually become the sourcing unit director, to eventually become the vice president of the supply chain, essentially 20 years from now we'll be sitting there and saying, from a management control perspective, we just can't find any good talent in order to manage the organizations. And so our approach is very important. Because if our approach is very much just in that core skill operational space, what we're actually doing is we're building perpetual servants rather than people that can eventually run and shape and influence and build their own businesses and companies.
I think one of the other criticisms would be that a lot of these programs and initiatives are aimed at the upper level of the organization. So you tend to find the executives being sent on these training programs. Do you think that's a fair criticism?
I would say so, because those ones, okay, so take a Harvard education, for instance. And some of the executives, we see that you find them having 2 or 3 MBAs, but from different institutions.
Yeah.
It becomes a beautiful thing in your CV, forgetting as to what it is that the objective should be for your learning, and what are you acquiring when you come back that you can impart in your organization to help your organization to transform as well.
One of the things that really bothers me is this burden that corporate South Africa is expected to take, and that is the burden between the poor school, primary, high school, and tertiary education. And then there's suddenly this expectation that corporate South Africa will bridge that gap. I just think that's wrong. And it's a struggle enough in this economy just to make a business that can survive and can make a profit. So I really think that there needs to be, maybe corporate South Africa needs to have more of a say in what happens at education level, because that needs to be fixed. Really, I don't think that we can be expected to bear the burden of a really bad education system. So there has to be pushback to say, listen, guys, you need to do your job. We'll do our job. We'll help the people to grow and give them skills and give them mentoring in the workplace. But heavens, we can't reach back and rescue somebody that got bad primary school education.
Yeah.
And I think, so yes, to a point, there could be a focus in terms of executive development or senior practice to functional enterprise level. But I do think that there is a lot more effort on youth development initiatives in terms of it could be people who need who's coming in with metric and requires a qualification into the system when they come into the system and workplace experience. Then it would be the interns in terms of people with diplomas and degrees. So I do think that there is also a bit of effort that is being made to be able to capacitate those. But more work is done because they come into the environment and they're actually not ready. Yep. So there's a lot of mentoring, coaching, because they come in and they're very overwhelmed about the workforce. Yes. So it steps back to how are we empowering or preparing in our community? Because, I mean, I look back in my childhood and some of the people that helped or mentored while I'm still in that journey. And then I find different people in my life, also given to Steve's conversation. So at the end of the day, there is a process that we need to go through as South African, our community, but at the same time, how do we ensure that by the time it gets to corporate, our kids are actually able and not as overwhelmed and entitled sometimes to be able to come in and start working.
So, sorry, you want to add?
No, I was just going to echo that to say, in the framework we have on skills development and BEE, there is a provision for that. Are we all taking advantage of that provision to do exactly what she's talking about?
Dominic?
Yeah. So the thought that I had was that we also need to begin to be honest about the current state of affairs in corporate South Africa. If we don't start engaging the belief systems within our organizations, if we don't start engaging consciously how it is that we change the culture of the organization, our efforts will fail. What do I mean by this? So we talk skills, we talk qualifications. Right now in South Africa, and I'm pretty certain that if you even thought of your environment and your organizations, there are white South Africans with a matric that are managing black South Africans with MBAs. But when we come to promotion discussions, no, these are the professionals that need perpetual training before they can be ready in order to take up positions of management. And so when I say that we need to begin to challenge some of these belief systems, it's our beliefs of the presumed competence and the presumed incompetence. People are going to get educated, but when they get into organizations, they then don't have the kind of access that enables them to grow. So a business partner of mine, we went into an organization last week. And with this organization, we do some work with executives around equality, diversity, and inclusion, and how do we challenge companies to really ensure that their environment enables skills development and BEE and transformation. So we met this one guy, elderly Jewish male. I had a conversation with him, really brief, 30 seconds, we did introductions. He then met my business partner, who's also a Jewish male. Because they had a commonality, those bras chatted for about 10 minutes. So where are your parents from and which school did you go to? Now, in that moment, for me, it became very clear. Had we been in that organization, not as service providers, but coming in as peers, who now need to grow within this organization, my business partner was going to be my manager in the next 3 years. not because he's more skilled than me, not because he's smarter than me, but because now he's got access to a sponsor within the organization. And so we need to do it quite holistically. If you just stick to skills and you stick to qualifications, believe me, you'll have very highly qualified technicians and artisans who we say are never ready to manage and grow and influence anything within our organization.
That's a really interesting point. I mean, I kind of see it as matching a culture of the organization. So transformation is also about transforming the culture. And that takes time, you know, and that's not easy. And it doesn't happen through skills development. I agree.
Do you think there needs to be greater collaboration between, one, government, educational institutions, and the corporate sector to make sure that we have the right skill sets that are kind of flowing through the pipeline?
I think there are efforts that are being made in that space because organizations do influence universities, and some of the organization representatives go to universities for dialogues, for shaping their curricula, and you would see as well the government doing the same thing. I think we can do much better in terms of what is it that organizations need, specifically talking about future skills. How do we shape it right now? The skills that we don't know we need. That conversation is not happening that very much. Just back onto the point that Dominic mentioned, it is unfortunate that the employment equity pillar is not a priority pillar in the BEE's legislation, because if it would have probably another way of addressing what he's talking about, to say you cannot perpetually train people to acquire more skills without exposing them to the real work. So if those two were to work together, maybe both of them being priority pillars, probably would have a better result.
Can I speak to that one of working together with government and education? The problem with government and with education systems is that they change far too slowly. You know, we've got a country where young people want things and they want them now. And they're not going to wait for the 10 years that it takes for UCT or University of Stellenbosch to reformat their training modules and get new professors. So I think there's another way around it, and that is actually about stepping outside those very formal, very slow structures and using things like Get Smarter, you know, using some of those much more agile training initiatives to do that, because we're not moving fast enough, and really the youth is going to overtake us if we don't get going.
100%. And so it becomes critical insofar as how do organizations actually invest in developing their own employees. So never mind the schooling system, never mind the government. What it is that you should be recruiting for is you should be recruiting for willing students. So let's make this clear. Unless you're getting in a specialist field like being a doctor or a surgeon or a CA or a pilot, unless you're a specialist, you actually do not need a degree. I can teach you how to be a salesperson. I can teach you how to be a marketer. I can teach you how to do human resources. And therefore, that we need to start thinking very differently insofar as what's this caliber of individual that we're wanting to bring in, and where do we have artificial barriers, rather, that are too high versus the roles that we can actually train them for and for them to be effective in.
Okay.
So,
quickly.
Going back to your point, employment equity and skills development are actually sisters, if I could put it that way, because if you are addressing employment equity, it becomes much easier to also address skills development, just going back to your point. So that's something that I think as corporate South Africa we need to urgently do something about, because it will make it easier to drive. But in terms of collaboration, I still think collaboration is needed, because we also have challenges in terms of funding. So yes, from a practical perspective, from a customization in terms of development that needs to address business objectives, yes, definitely. However, from a funding perspective as well, we need to be able to sit in those, to be able to influence. Currently, there is a percentage that goes to SARS that comes back through the CETAs. Are we having enough access to that funding? So collaboration will make it easier for us to be able to address some of those issues. If we just step back and start doing things in silos, we're going to still find ourselves in the challenge, in the similar situation that we are. We have to influence and influence hard.
Just picking up on the funding issue, one of the things that the Skills Development Act says is that 6% of your wage bill needs to be dedicated to investing in training programs for your black employees. What happens when an organization or small business doesn't have that capital outlay? You're caught in a catch-22 situation.
Yes, you
We
are.
all just agree.
You are.
I mean, how does one deal with that issue? Because, you know, one, there's compliance. It kind of limits your access to opportunities. Yeah. What are some of the things, maybe we'll get into that one can do to mitigate that situation?
But there are exclusions in the legislation as well for smaller enterprises, because they can opt in to be compliant or choose not to be compliant. I would guess that those that are forward-looking would still make some efforts to budget for skills training, because they deem it as important for their growth in that way.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And let me put it this way. Show me any company that does not invest in skills development, and I'll show you a dying or dead organization.
Okay, let's leave that conversation there. So,
but just one thing to highlight. So there are also opportunities for funding that I think people can be able to tap into. And that's why it's important to have your BE advisors or skills development advisors that can be able to help you to look at tax incentives or certain programs, which could come on a monthly basis or come when the program is initiated or program is ended, discretionary grants, mandatory grants because of the percentage that goes to the CETA. So there are opportunities for funding that one can be able to look at. But again, to Dominic's point, we cannot be able to address productivity, performance, economic growth without skills development.
All right, so the challenges are many, and we won't get through all of them today. There's a limited range of program offerings when it comes to skills development, shortage of suitably qualified trainers to carry out the programs, development of the various curricula. But let's just focus to some of the things that one can do despite all of that. I want to start off by asking Thabo, perhaps you, what would you rather invest in, upskilling or reskilling your workforce?
A balance again. Both are important. Upskilling in terms of where you're going in your organization from a strategic point of view, and reskilling because the world changes, and now we talk about artificial intelligence, robotics, and you have good people that were okay and relevant in your past organizational needs, but will not be relevant in your future organizational needs. There you need to reskill those individuals instead of laying them out of your organization. So I would strike a balance on both.
Nora, do you agree?
Definitely agree. I think to add on that, it's also just to ensure that the youth development model is aligned to our business imperative. So when they come in, the programs we put them on, and also transitioning them into absorption or permanent opportunities is another thing that we can be able to definitely do better.
Ladies and gentlemen, at this time I'd like to open the floor for any questions. There will be a roving mic. I think I have one of them here. If you can just take it through. I've got a gentleman here and one right at the back. And while those mics come through to you, I want to ask, when would the right time be to implement a skills development program, do you think? Particularly, maybe let's look at it from a small business perspective. Yeah.
So I think in a small business environment, the reality is that there isn't the money to throw at the problem. So in a small business, it's really important to be very outcomes based, and to put in place plans that meet the individual needs of the business. So, for example, what we train and what we do in our organization, what we train for other people, is really making sure that you have meaningful conversations with each individual, understanding what their growth expectations are. So really taking it on a personal level and saying, what is it where would you like to be in 2-3 years' time? And let's look at the gap there. And then making a personalized program like that. So I think it starts very, very early on. As soon as a business is settled, a small business is settled and is looking to a future growth. It's never too early, let's put it like that.
Yeah, your perspective, Tom?
Starting way back into maybe not even graduates, offering bursaries for communities, that's where it really starts. If you have done your work to shape the curricula at universities perhaps, and maybe influencing schools to have subjects that are relevant to where we're going in the future of industries, I think that is a better way of starting other than catching it late. because you catch it late, those people, or rather the students or communities are already socialized in a different way of a different conversation, which then becomes hard to change the conversation and for the future as well on the skills that we're looking for.
Can I just jump in here? It's one of the things that's very obvious to me when growing small businesses and growing enterprises is that one of the problems with South African education is that it's very formulaic. You go to school to learn the answers to matric. And heaven forbid that you would put in a conversation that was some way outside of those parameters. And yet, as an entrepreneur, you can't succeed like that. Entrepreneurship is all about agile thinking. It's all about thinking in 360 degrees at the same time. It's thinking on your feet. And in actual fact, the same kind of things that one needs in corporate leadership. Yep. And yet we don't teach that. Yep. We tend to teach A plus B in a very linear fashion. So if we're really to change the focus of society in South Africa and get people that are accountable and that really want to step into the circle and lead in any environment, we need to change the way that we teach right the way from the beginning. This kind of paternalistic, linear outcomes method just isn't working for us anymore. In the modern age, it's got to move on.
Let's take a question. Your name and your question, please, sir.
My name is Sibusiso. And I just want to know, because judging from the conversations that you guys are having, there needs to be critical conversations that are had with regards to true transformation versus compliance.
Yes.
How do we initiate and later sustain those conversations?
Sure.
Yes.
Can I have a first bite of that?
You can have a first bite on that.
Number one, we need to begin to be honest regarding our fears and our angers as they relate to transformation. So we're having this discussion and we're very much within this conceptual space. So I met a young man in Durban, 25 years old. He said, Dominic, I grew up in the South African education system. From the age of 9, we were taught about HIV. I know how it's contracted, I know how it's prevented, I know how it's treated. A colleague of mine came out as HIV positive a few months ago, and for some reason or another, whenever that colleague makes me a cup of tea or coffee, I cannot bring myself to drink it. All right? There's something far deeper than education and information that we're throwing at people. When the Department of Labor requires employment equity stats and sets a deadline, and out of 1,000 companies that they approached, only 27 meet the deadline, not compliant, meet the deadline out of 1,000. It speaks to, although we're saying that we are for the transformation project, but we actually do not believe in it. We don't. It terrifies us. So step number one is we need to start having that human conversation. We need to start being very honest with our history and where it is that we are in the present. We need to get to that point where we're able to hold the complexity of the human being and their subjective feelings, as well as the objective facts of where it is that we're trying to get to as South Africa in this transformation journey.
Anybody else?
I think he was articulating.
You think he did? Okay, all right. Let's take the next question there at the back. And before we get that, any other questions? I've got one in the front here. And on to my left. Go ahead, sir.
My name is Isaac Raputa. Just to preface what I'm saying, I think the gentleman is right that we do a box ticking. That's why this discussion is going in circles like we do. I want to make two statements, and if I'm wrong, correct me. But I think that's where the problem is. The problem with skills development in South Africa is because we don't train and skill people, we poach amongst each other, especially at the senior management and level and executives. The second issue is that we don't need Skills Development Act to train and skill people. Because I think this discussion that people are looking at the levy and whatever actually condones that mentality that you need an act for you to train people.
Response?
So, again, I think, yes, to a point, you're right. But at the same time, if something is not happening in the pace that it needs to happen, we somehow need to draw the line. And there must be some rules and regulations to force us to be able to start the process. But when we have that process that is forcing us, how do we make sure that we make it meaningful, we make it purposeful, and it becomes a fit-for-purpose initiative? Yeah. And I think that's where we need to go to. So we have an opportunity. How do we maximize on that opportunity? the reason the act is there is because it wasn't happening.
Yeah.
So now it's there. How do we make sure that we implement it in the way that actually benefits not just corporate South Africa, but the whole of South Africa?
100%.
I think there's something else that comes into this, and it's that transformation and skills development needs to be a strategic imperative.
Yes.
So corporate South Africa needs to understand that their competitive advantage sits there.
Yeah.
That it's not about compliance or skills development. Yeah. It's actually about saying, how am I going to be a competitive company in the future in South Africa? And if you start it from that perspective, one can only look at transformation. One can only look at improving skills. There's no other answer.
Yeah. And it's a culture. So what type of culture, not just as corporate South Africa, but as South Africa, do we want to drive? If we look at the current attributes, are they the kind of attributes that can be able to influence us to get to the destination that we're looking for? And I think if we go back to the conversation, the initial speaker who opened, Stephen, we can see that we're not there. So how do we change the dialogue to the attributes that we actually want to achieve?
Okay. Dominic, you want to add something? Or take the next question?
Let's take the next question.
All right. Right at the back over there, please stand up, sir. And then we'll come up to the front over here.
My name is Iso Moloko. I'm here representing Funda College in Soweto. I'm basically an internal auditor there on a voluntary capacity. My point is that the outcomes of skills development and training, we can look at the headlines: fraud and corruption, rampant fraud and corruption. Are we doing the right thing? Whatever we are training, shouldn't we move from whatever we are training and train people mainly on ethics and how to prevent fraud and corruption? And just my answer there, we are undermining the internal audit departments. That's where we could be training. Thank you.
Okay. Go ahead, Dominic.
So I think for me, it's both and. You need to train for the technical skills, and then you need to train for the ethics of being a manager. But that being said, let us not buy into these false narratives that we're taught. In this country, corruption, much like transformation, is very politicized. When you say corruption, we know exactly what it is that we mean, but we don't say it in ways that are overt. It cannot be right that we assume that people that we upskill will eventually be corrupt when they get to certain positions. We're not going to go anywhere. Because essentially, underneath that assumption is an assumption that people that previously did not access these spaces are inherently corrupt. And as soon as they have opportunities, they're just going to squander those opportunities. That cannot be right. We are facing a youth unemployment, guys, in this country where black youth and even colored youth between the ages of 18 to 34 was sitting with a 60% unemployment rate. 60. Yeah. That is dangerous for all of us. Black, white, Indian, or colored. And unless you form part of the 0.1% of the wealthiest South Africans who's got a helipad and a private jet, if this country goes into civil unrest, we are all in the Hamors together. All of us. And so really, the kind of thinking that we're needing to start to get into now is us as employers. Our business imperative is not mutually exclusive to the social impact. By solving for business, by developing the skills, you're actually helping the social impact. And to your point, sir, when you said that people then poach, don't even worry about that. Let's develop the skills, because you're not just developing the skills for your own business, you're developing them for the market.
So, Dominic, there's something actually worries me even more, and that is that so many youth have pieces of paper that are really worth nothing.
Sure.
And I think that we're doing such a disservice by letting young people believe that when they get their certificate, whether it's matric or a diploma or even a university degree, that it's going to be of value in the workplace. There is such a disconnect between what's coming out and what the skills that they have with a piece of paper and what I and other employers need. It's just, we're in a different world. And the problem is that we keep on raising the expectations of these poor youth that have gone through that, only for them to be disappointed. And that is the danger. That is one of the biggest dangers. As part of the 60% unemployed are people with certificates that are not valued in the workplace, because they don't have the skills that the workplace needs.
I don't know if we can teach ethics, because ethics has got to do with values as well, and sometimes it's circumstantial. So are we really talking about the root cause of that, that then we see that people are not ethical? I would think that we have to look at the root cause of ethics. Like, for instance, poverty can be the root cause of ethics. Having nothing can lead you to do other things that are not ethical. So those are the root causes that we have to deal with first. And there are other issues, specifically from a values point of view, as to how we bring up our children, how do we teach them at home, that then make them better people in the future.
And I think that's definitely the conversation that we need to, the dialogue that we need to continuously have, and the awareness, because training cannot solve everything.
No.
So just because you're empowering with so much information is not going to shift the problem that we have. Then how do we dig deeper to understand what is the problem, and then what is then the best solution that we can be able to employ?
Let's take a question, please, sir.
Sanbonani, good afternoon. My name is Vezibiela. I'm coming from an organization called National Professional Tertiary Cooperative. So it's a cooperative in a juristic capacity. In South Africa, we're very good in talking, but lacking in implementing. We've got good policies, but needs to be translated into action. With regard to skills development is a very critical area. When I started in the banking environment 38 years ago, without a degree, the twinning of being educated in that profession and also doing it is very advantageous. I did my studies through the Institute of Bankers, but during the day I was doing the bank's work. Okay, it was during the apartheid area where we were finding it difficult, even after gaining those qualifications, to get recognized and do the job. But fortunately, I stayed in that profession for 23 years, but not in one bank, in about 5 banks. I've been out of the banking sector for the past 15 years, but commercial banking sector. I'm in the cooperative banking sector now, where there's a real need to train the people to understand banking, especially business banking. The government has laid the framework where we can establish township-based and rural-based cooperative banks which can focus on the SMMEs. We know how difficult it is as an SMME to deal with a commercial bank. I know it as a banker myself. I know it as a business person myself now. That's why we find it critical to train these young people to be bankers the way the old system trained us. But what is good, when we train them in that skill, with those banks in place, they are able to translate their skills into action because that's where they are needed. Maybe the corporates do not need them, they train them just for the sake of ticking the box. But in SMME, we need them for putting them into use. So it's not a question, but I'm just talking to you two guys. Maybe you are still in corporates, I'm no longer in that jail, but your experience can help us in the SME. How can the two, SMMEs and the corporates, help each other being guided by these principles in the Act, but we put it into action because there are skills we need which are seated with you corporates, but we need them in the SMMEs. When you retrench those people, we need them in the SMMEs.
All right, thank you for that. Catherine, I'm going to ask you to respond to that, but can I just see by a show of hands how many more questions we have? Got that gentleman over there, one to my right. Okay, quite a few questions, and the lady there. All right, let's get Catherine's response.
So I'll very quickly
first.
respond to that. I completely agree with you. Thank you for making that comment. And in fact, before we came on stage, Nora and I had exactly that conversation to say, as a small business growth specialist, I can learn from her best practice. Yes. And so we already have created a collaboration like that. And my role is to share it with people like you. So let's speak after this.
Sir?
So I believe I've got to get into the shot. Hi, morning. My name is Greg Carolyn, Managing Partner for Decision Process International Africa. So I come out of a banking background like my friend over here. And one of the questions that I have is, what is, I don't want to call corporate South Africa, but business South Africa lost in the old ways of how we did things in terms of training people internally for the future strategy of the organization? What in the last 22 years, 28 years, 30 years has changed where business is not looking at Where do we want to be as a competitive organization, the skills we need, and therefore becoming the training ground. I started in Barclays in 1985, and we were seen as the training organization for banking. We would have people come in, we'd lose them to Standard Bank, Nedbank, whatever. But the philosophy was, if we don't train, we won't get the skill we need to employ the strategy. So what has changed? Where business is not investing in their people.
My view is that I don't think there has been a change or non-commitment in business to train people. I think what has changed is the world has changed. The way we do things now and the pace that we do things now is different from how it used to be done in the past. You would train people in the past. I also was in the banking environment in my starting career. You would train people to be a teller, and that skill will last them for a long time. But now there are different ways of doing business. There are different ways of transacting in business. If you were not taught at that time about the ways now, you would not have been taught at that time by the ways now, because the world was different. And now with technology, the pace in which we have to train is very much faster, and we're not catching up. So it's not a lack of no commitment. It's a lack of knowing what we need for the future for us to be ready for it.
So
that's my...
Just to add on that, I think critical thinking is one of the skill set that has become very critical. Problem solving aligned to that. And if I could give a typical example, in my environment, we deal a lot with drivers. So he or she has to be a brand ambassador when they are interacting with a client out there. So how do we then make sure that they understand what client centricity is about? They can be able to solve a problem when they're not able to get hold of their line leader, but they've got a client right in front of them. They're able to communicate in the layperson way or layman's term way that they're still able to represent the business. So it's these critical skills that will help us to be able to deal with the changing pace that we faced in. And that's why it's important to have frameworks, levels of accountability, frameworks that will be able to make it clear that those career paths, we understand what needs to happen in each and how do we develop our people. And I think that will help a lot.
All right. Question there, sir.
Thank you. My name is Christo. I run a media and marketing company, but I also sit on the ward committee, and which reports to the city council. And my responsibilities there is infrastructure and social services, which has to deal with job creation, focusing on the young people. My question to the panelists is, how do you engage the National Development Plan? Because that's a framework for us. It's a blueprint that says, these are the skills we need in this country in 2030. So how do you engage the National Development Plan? And secondly, how do you also engage the National Skills Development Strategy, which sits with the SETAs? You know, if you train, do you look at the National Development Skills Strategy and say, okay, these imperatives we have met, or this is how we're gonna meet these imperatives based on that? Thanks.
Yeah.
Dominic?
I read the National Development Plan document. In one of the first pages of the National Development Plan document, it said, all of these solutions hinge on our social cohesion. And that's why I stopped reading it. Because I realized if we don't have social cohesion within South Africa, it's not going to happen. Let me make an example on critical thinking. So critical thinking, we really understand it from that conceptual space, all right? So I do some diversity work as well within schools. So went to a private school that predominantly had white kids. I asked them, the kids, you know, how many of you, what do you guys think about BE affirmative action and the like? And they had very strong views about affirmative action, BE transformation, and how it's taking away their opportunities and they're not going to be successful or make a future for themselves within South Africa. 15 to 18-year-olds. My next question was, how many of you have applied for a job? Not one. Not one of them, but all very clear in their opinions in how these policies are taking away from their opportunities. So now that's the subjective bit of the human being. Back at the ranch, objectively, in 2017 and 2018 in South Africa, of all the new people that came in as first-time entrants to the labor market, 52% of them were white in the past 2 years. If you look at the promotions that happened in the past 2 years, of 54% of the promotions that happened were white people that were promoted within it. But there's the subjective fear that says the National Development Plan, the transformation journey, is taking away from opportunities. And so if we don't have social cohesion, the aligning with the educational institutions, providing the programs, doing the learnerships, that's the easy stuff. If we don't understand the broader picture that we're driving towards, the NDP is literally a document that none of us will be able to achieve.
And I think it's key to be involved. So the CETAs, in most cases, especially these days, they are actually creating platforms where they want to understand what are those gaps that need to be addressed. Are we really present there to actually make those shifts? And are we holding each other accountable to make sure that those things happen? So I think if we're not, then it becomes a challenge. But those opportunities are there. I mean, with TITA, they actually had a session on the 29th where they wanted to understand, but it's also about holding them accountable to make sure that whatever we're committing to, that we've identified, actually happens.
All right. There was a question, can I have the microphone? Okay, you've got the microphone. Go for it.
Okay. I am Tabisan Poshoko from LFP Training Consultants, and I'm the commercial director there. Not really a question, it's a statement. Going back to the government collaboration with the corporate companies. As it is where we are right now as LFP, our focus is mainly on people living with disability. And the idea is to bridge the unemployment for them to be employed into any sector. The reason is, if we are not looking into these people living with disability, who else should? And how are we going to incorporate the government into making sure that when we need people that are unemployed to be employed in any sector that we can source? Now, going back to what the other gentleman said at the back, he mentioned something about knowing how to implement. The big question is, everybody talks about BEE, everybody talks about transformation and compliance. The keynote is why. You need to understand why you are going through the BEE and you want to transform. Then it goes back to, why are you transforming these people? Are we transforming these people just for them to be transformed so as we can tick the box? Or are we transforming so as in 3 years to come today, we meet the very same people that we transformed, sitting in a high position in any company? Or are we doing it so as we can be known as the company who is transforming people? In conclusion, if we change the perception and how we view things and understanding the IQ and the AQ, South Africa will be changed.
Good point.
That's a point.
They all agree with you.
Statement.
Can I get the microphone through to that gentleman over there quickly, please? I'm going to take 2 more questions. Can I see hands? There's a gentleman to my right here. Anybody else? And you'll be the last person. Go ahead, sir.
Good morning. Thank you for the opportunity. My name is John McConnell. I am responsible for the training function at the National Chamber of Milling. So our prime task is to train millers with the assistance of their employers. The question of mentorship came up earlier on with the panel, and it is most probably one of the most difficult problems that we are faced with at the moment. Not necessarily because people are unwilling, but rather because they are not capable, because they don't really understand what is required of them. And to request them to fill in a logbook of each step that the course takes is ticking the boxes, which doesn't serve the purpose at all. Having said that, the industry decided 5 years ago to get a course which has existed for 40 years and was the only course, and in terms of the MAIS courses, the only one in the world. We decided to apply for accreditation of the course. I would be understating the problems that we encountered along the road in terms of how onerous it's been to get to where we are now, working with the CETAs and with the rest of education, QCTO, etc., in terms of their requirements and ongoing changes. We have achieved accreditation, and we have an uptick in the number of students that are entering for the course, and obviously they all have to be employees of companies who fund their training. There's a lot of movement within the industry, so the numbers that have been coming through on the training course over the last couple of years is about 450 or so students. Just to close, I would suggest that a similar function as to what I have attended here this morning involve people like the CETAs and like QCTO, higher education, so that they also understand from a wider audience what is required of them.
Thank you. Let me take your question, seeing as the microphone is there in any case. And I'll take yours.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Isabel, and I'm from JT Comms. Thank you for this morning and for a very insightful discussion. I just wanted to it's more of a comment, but I await your guidance and assistance in explaining it. Miss Catherine, you mentioned that you made a remark about the disconnect that's between higher education and corporate. Yeah. I speak from experience. What I've noticed when I was in tertiary is when I was applying for a job, and I studied marketing, and every vacancy I looked at would ask me to have a driver's license, which was fine. You get a driver's license. Then it would ask me for at least 5 years minimum experience. Yes. And I thought to myself, but where on earth am I going to get that if I'm coming from college? So I think maybe it's a suggestion to say corporate SA must then partner with higher education institutes. Well, you mentioned something very encouraging to me now. And I think it's up to the private sector or the corporates to actually get or impose their presence in higher education. Get in there, partner, and absorb these students, because I'm willing to bet that the 60% that are sitting at home with their papers, it's not because they were misled with their degrees. It's a passion it's a journey that they pursued because they want to genuinely be in that field. But they don't have the opportunity because they lack experience. So where is corporate playing its part to make sure that the people get the experience?
Can I respond to that?
Thank
you. You're speaking to something dear to my heart. I might start jumping up and down just now. I want to say two things. It frustrates me hugely that the CETAs and the SACRA process is so slow. It's way, way, way too slow. It needs to be far more agile. It has to respond. You know, business, you spoke about the needs changing so fast. It's like the needs of business are changing so fast, and education's getting slower and slower. And so that's where the gap is going. So I'm not a favor. If I can, I stay away from accredited training because I find that it doesn't meet the needs of the people that I'm working with. So that's one thing. And then the second thing is I'm also really not in favor of the internship program, the formal internship program. I've come across so many youngsters that have been parked in a corner doing work, like sitting, playing on their phones or whatever, like being completely unproductive, not in any way creating shared value for themselves or for the company, getting paid by the CETA. There's no commitment anywhere. Everybody goes out and they learn nothing. And they're not going to be employed in the corporate anyway. It's just a tick box exercise. Yep. I think far more valuable is what we actually imply in Fatola, and I recommend all small businesses that we work with to do, and that is about work experience. So taking somebody, we call them interns because it means there's a safe space, you're there to learn, yes. But it's practical, applied work experience. And that is the way that you can bridge from the theory, which really you don't know anything about business, to actually becoming a valuable employee. But for me, the sticking point is all these tick boxes and these incredibly onerous and really totally unproductive systems that are currently in place in formal training.
Just to add on your point, it's guided work experience that includes that coaching and mentoring. So then you get value out of it.
Yes, but it has to meet the needs of the company. Because if all it meets is the needs of the CETA or the SACRA accreditation, it's useless to anybody. Yes. Because you're not learning anything. The company's getting no value. You're not able to spot somebody that really you want to take on because you're not testing them in that space. And for me, that's where this ticking the box it's a travesty.
So I do think that there is some movement. Some of the initiatives that we've run, I mean, last year, our recent graduate program, we actually throughout the process wanted to see the value that they're adding, even in a quantifiable manner. So what is the value analysis continuously for themselves and for the business? And it forces the process where that is then addressed.
Sorry, I just wanted to say, Nora spoke to me before and she hasn't spoken up about it. And the thing is that what is really impressive with her program at Imperial Logistics is that she's working with a training partner where they are customizing the training to their needs. And that is exactly what's needed. Yeah. That is the answer.
Oh, well done, Nora. Thank you. Very quickly, before I get your closing thoughts, so your question quickly, please.
Yeah. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Temko Sizungu from a organization called Tsuwa Foundation from Eshowe in KZN. My question is that why there has been no emphasis on RPL? Because based on my observation and experience, some organizations don't even understand what is that. Even the higher education institutions have just started recently in the past 2-3 years to recognize your experience if you want to apply for qualifications, and what really can be done to put emphasis on RPL, because it has been there for more than 10 years beyond the Skills Development Act. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you. So with the recognition of prior learning, there are organizations that are doing it quite successfully. We haven't spoken about it because a lot of the focus currently has been with the youth. But I know with organizations like Unilever, where they literally go and look at their operators that have been working in the organization 10 years, 15 years, to then say, insofar as their career growth and opportunities, how do they use RPL in order to chart a path where they are enabled to be able to grow and they're empowered. RPL is also a very crucial component when we're looking at barriers to employment equity. So barriers to employment equity, some of it, when people are saying they don't have the right kind of talent to be able to promote, RPL comes in to actually say these individuals have been doing the work. They've acquired the skills. Yes, they may not have degrees, but actually if you support them as an organization and provide them with the kind of mentoring and training that they require, they can actually grow and expand.
All right, we've run out of time, so I want to get your closing thoughts very quickly from each of you in about 30 seconds. If you look ahead, what would you like to see being done in order to improve our skills development track record? Thabo.
I would say that we still have got a lot of work to do. We've done some work to this far, and there's some improvement in corporates, but there's a lot more to be done, specifically if we look at the future, how the future is going to be, how it will look. Some of us don't know how the future looks. Some of us know, we have done some research to that effect, but how are we upskilling our people to be agile, to be able to be ready for the future and getting the skills that will be required for the future? And how do we use what we have available now, be it is legislated because we were not doing it before, but we have to take advantage of that and look for the opportunities that it presents to us. And by the way, Catherine, we're doing the same thing as Noah is doing in Alexander Forbes.
I was waiting for that. Nora?
I still say collaboration. I think as Business South Africa, we're not able to do this on our own. So I like somebody's word, actually, and I'm going to steal it, impose, and I do think that's what we need to do. So we need to have more of this, but with the right stakeholders, and then we need to hold each other accountable. But at the same time, we need to understand the changing pace of whatever that the business is experiencing. And we also need to go back to the community and influence the changes that needs to happen in our communities. Because if not, if mentoring is happening to that boy child, to that girl child, then it's the primary, then it's the high school, then it's the tertiary. Can you imagine what Business South Africa will then look like?
Catherine?
Right, and I think we need generational change. And I think the two components of that are, first of all, placing as transformation and skills development as a real strategic objective in a company for corporate, for competitive advantage. Then the other thing that I would really like is that the legislation permits more of internal training and skills transfer in an informal way, because my belief is that's where change really happens.
Absolutely. For myself, the starting point is understanding why. Why are we doing this thing and what it is that we're trying to achieve? If we are not invested in the skills development of this country, if we are not invested in creating employment, if we are not invested in decreasing the inequality that we see today, if that's not our greater why that we're driving for, the skills development will not come into being. So organizations really need to ensure that at the core of skills development, it's actually part of your ways of working. Yeah. Skills development informs your performance management, your talent development. Skills development informs your strategic growth imperatives and where it is that you want to go, because then you'll find that you're able to grow your business as well as have a huge social impact.
Good place to leave it. So ladies and gentlemen, that's where we leave it. As you can see, a lot of issues, a lot of wide-ranging views on how to tackle them. I do believe with the right partners, we can address all of those and improve our skills development track record. That's where we're going to leave things for today. A very big thank you once again to LFP for hosting this business dialogue. And thank you for coming. Have a good morning.
Cool. Great.
Thank you.